Welcome to the Thinking Business podcast brought to you by Trowers and Hamlins. In this special series, we explore the latest challenges, opportunities and trends facing businesses. We speak to a range of industry experts and leaders to share their insights and wisdom in navigating the changing landscape. My name is Charlotte Clayson. I'm a partner in the commercial disputes team at Trowers and Hamlins, and I have a particular focus on all things data, cyber and technology. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Rupert Small, founder and CEO of Egregious. Welcome, Rupert.
Thanks, Charlotte.
So perhaps you could just give us a little bit of an insight to your background and how you came to be in the position you are now, which is working in the technology field very closely with AI. Just so perhaps a little bit about your story, how you got here.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a data scientist my whole career. So when I left uni as a newly minted mathematician and physicist, it was kind of a natural field to go into for many people in my field. And it was already a very exciting field back then. There was a lot happening, a lot of change. Every few months, a new model would come out that would just blow everyone out of the water and do something no one expected a mere model to be able to do. So I was very excited by all of that already, back then, more than 10 years ago now. So I decided that field was the one for me. It was a lot of fun, a lot of dynamism, change, opportunity, also for growth and leadership and managing a whole team eventually, which is what I ended up doing. And essentially over time, I worked through a whole bunch of startups, and I decided at some point I should really have a crack at it myself.
Yeah.
I should start a startup too, because that was also really fun besides all of the AI and the machine learning. Just being there, having a small team growing something from scratch really appealed to me. So a couple of years ago, I decided I'd, throw my hat into the ring, founded a startup, Egregious, decided to focus on something quite novel and distinctive, also just because of the thrill of it as much as anything else, but also because it felt like a really important thing to do. So we focus on essentially tracking, detecting, chasing bots, but we do that using bots, of course. We chase bots with bots, which is what makes it quite novel and unique. And yeah, that's what we do today, and that's kind of why I'm here with you now.
Excellent. An exciting area to be in, AI at the moment and technology, but also in a startup as well. Just the imagine it's a bit of a roller coaster, the ups and downs and the thrill and the exhilaration of being in such an exciting, changing industry, and as a startup as well. Must bring lots of opportunities.
Yeah, there's a lot on, and especially now with AI becoming pretty much what people talk about all day, every day, can become a bit too much. And so you're really at the epicenter of where everyone's attention is these days. And so navigating that environment is kind of that much more thrilling and risky at the same time. You have to have your wits about you. And yeah, as you say, it is a roller coaster. There are downs for sure, but there's a lot of ups, and it's a good bit of fun. So it's worth being here.
Well, and we're delighted that you're here joining us. It's great to have such an expert and sort of enthusiastic member of the tech community with us to talk about cyber risk and AI and technology. So thank you for being here. Taking a step back, I think, we've spoken about how everybody is talking about AI, and we know that the adoption of AI is accelerating. Obviously, that comes with some complexity, and some of those complexities Egregious is dealing with and helping battle. What do you see as the biggest cyber risks for businesses when they are thinking about adopting AI?
I would kind of break it down into different layers. So there's kind of the infrastructure risk, so the risk associated with your machines or your equipment or your tools. If you plug an AI into an important machine in your factory, for example, that's going to come with some risks. You need to make sure that AI is a kind of a specialist in that machine. It's not going to operate it in a way that's outside of norm. It's not going to break it or wear it out. sooner than it should be worn out. So there's that infrastructure risk if you just naively plug an AI into what could be a pretty exquisite, expensive piece of machinery, or even just a laptop or a computer. So that counts as well. It's an important area of risk and risk assessment. That's infra layer. Then the layer above that is the software layer. So that's when you plug AI into like PowerPoint or some other software application. So if you give it permission to use that, that comes with some risks of its own. You might want to, not want to give it access to your HR system, or if you do, it needs to come with constraints and it needs to be aware that there's sensitive data in there. That's the software layer. Then above that, there's the network layer. That's about connectivity between all of those systems. Network layer could be something like, is the AI allowed to send emails for me? That's like transferring data from one place to the next. Is it allowed to transfer files from one place to the next? So it's all about what data is allowed to be shifted. Who has the permission to do that? Is the AI you're giving that access to able to make the right assumptions for that kind of network layer of security? And then the final layer, I would call it the behavioral layer. Okay, it's the layer we are usually associated purely with humans.
Yeah.
Because usually we're just the only ones behaving, but nowadays AI can behave too. AI can kind of act like us and imitate us. So that's become the new layer of the whole cyber risk stack. It starts with the hardware, then it's the software, then it's the network, and then there's behavior as well, which includes human behavior. But when you're talking about cyber risk, you're usually implying that you're talking about an AI agent that's kind of acting like a human. So, for example, some AI agents, they're in like call centers to answer customer service calls. So that would be an example where AI is kind of taught to act like a human and imitate a human so that other humans can engage with it in a way that's kind of more natural to them. They don't have to use software. That can expose you to more risk as well, because that agent kind of may have access to some of your business data. So again, you need to make sure that at that layer, that behavioral layer, it knows how to behave. Also, when it's behaving with humans, you don't want it to start insulting your customers, or go off the rails and do something like that. So yeah, that's the final kind of layer of risk, and it's the newest one as well. It's the one where there's kind of new crafts being formed and new specialists are entering that field to figure out, what does cyber risk mean in that new behavioral layer.
And what about, so you've talked through a lot of different layers of risk that are associated with AI, and we can drill into some of those in a moment. But we also know that AI is being used not just for good, not just to create efficiencies within businesses, but there are groups of individuals who are using AI for a nefarious purpose, for AI for bad. And that comes in all sorts of different guises, I think, and that can obviously also expose you to cyber risk. So from my perspective, I deal a lot with responses to cyber attacks. And we see increasingly, and the National Cybersecurity Centre has also made note of this, that increasingly the threat actors, so the bad guys, are using AI and generative AI to make their attacks more sophisticated, to increase the impact and scale of the attacks. So we also know that there's risks sort of internally within your organisation if you're adopting AI. But there is also AI being used for bad as well by the threat actors. So there's a lot to balance, isn't there? A lot of risks to balance.
Yeah, huge amount. And as you say, both internal to the organization with your staff, with your customers, with your customers' data, with your staff's data, with your own kind of corporate secrets, as well as everyone on the outside who's potentially trying to exploit some loopholes in your system, whether that's at the hardware layer, the software layer, because AI is becoming good at hacking autonomously now as well, and that might impact both your systems and your people, because those can be in the form of, say, a software hack, but it could also be a social engineering attack, which no longer needs to be done by a human anymore.
Yeah.
As you say, it could be done autonomously and at scale just by an AI who's pretending to be a human.
Yeah, and we've obviously seen in the news recently that social engineering has been used very successfully in some recent large-scale cyber attacks. So I suppose just thinking about that question of, you talked about, company secrets and confidential information, data and personal data that's being used. And obviously the more information you provide to your AI tools, in some ways the better it can work for you and provide efficiencies and provide all those magical things that you're looking for in adoption of AI. But there are inherent risks with that. I suppose the other risk is that for businesses, there's lots of businesses who are considering, well, how do we use AI in our business? What do we use it for? What are the use cases? And while they're thinking about that, employees are using AI already. The sort of concept of shadow AI. And that comes with its own data security risks and confidentiality challenges. So with employees using these tools already, whether they've been approved or not by the business as a whole, what do you think businesses should be doing to safeguard against those risks that we've been talking about?
Yeah, there's a few things the business can do, but also that individuals and staff can do as well. So, as you say, staff are bringing in these third-party tools through potentially personal devices. Some businesses may mandate that, that's not permitted in certain circumstances. Others, it really may not matter, and it actually may be beneficial if they do that. So it's a bit of a spectrum in terms of what businesses are doing to make sure that that's done in the appropriate context. And by context, I mean not just, what your staff are trying to achieve with those tools, but the data context as well around that. Is it being used on data where it's safe to use third-party tools for its intended purpose? So there's a bit your staff can do, and that's kind of a staff training issue, just making people aware of the different contexts in which they operate, where it's safe to use their own tools and where it's not, and to create a kind of definitive boundary between those two use cases. There's also processes the business can put in place to ensure that tools that are brought in from outside are used safely. So checking, just like you would check what software is installed on your business machines, you should check, who's connecting with which tools to your internal infrastructure, and having a kind of a way to provenance that and understand that, just like you would with software. And then there's also the responsibility which goes to the applications themselves. So when they're processing data that's given to them by the users, they need to recognize that users may occasionally give them sensitive data. It might be dates of birth, credit card numbers, personal addresses. It might be personal data from customers. And if they can detect that, then they can, assess whether that data can be used for training purposes or not. So I think everyone in that kind of collective has a responsibility of their own. The users to use it in the appropriate context, the business to kind of trust but verify, so to have systems in place to assess when that's happening and to assure themselves that it's happening, as well as their customers. And then the application creators as well, because they're kind of part of that relationship.
Yeah.
And so to be kind of responsible providers of that service, even if it's to the public, to make sure that when the public maybe misuses software by mistake, they take corrective action as well.
And one thing that lots of businesses are conscious about in terms of risk is the risk of bias and potential discrimination. So what can they do to make sure that their AI systems aren't running those risks of spewing out answers that are biased or incorrect or discriminatory? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, so at the moment, the models we have, they're basically imitators. They're taking data that's been given to them in the past and kind of recreating it in different contexts. So that's kind of what I meant by, it can be a bit like raising children and teaching them lessons and, showing them how things are done. And if they're given the wrong lessons, they're at risk of reproducing those when they go out into the real world. And it's really the same with models today, at least. And models in the future may have certain other elements at play which help them get around this. But for now, it's really about imitation and being careful about what you teach it and what you train it on. And for the most part, what's in the mainstream data sources and also what's in the mainstream media, it can be fairly safe. But there's also a lot of content out there in the tails, which is very toxic and extreme. That data is getting into these very large frontier AI models. And you can see that when people start to ask it questions about, minority groups or other toxic like subjects which get toxic very quickly, or where people have used AI to, generate a lot of commentary that is actually just very harmful. So in cases like that, it's the responsibility of the model creators to ensure that they're feeding the data the right kind of information, the right kind of training data. Just like you want to give your children the right lessons, you want to give the models the right lessons. On the corporate side, on the enterprise side, what you can do is, again, trust but verify. So when you are assessing which model to use in your enterprise, what you want to do is have a list of evaluations, just like you would do if you're assessing whether a member of staff is the right fit for your team. So you would have a list of kind of must-haves and nice-to-haves and specific skills you want the model to be absolutely brilliant at, and others which you want it to be good at, but it's not it's not a critical if they don't have some of those. And so it's through those evaluations that you can test whether there's bias in the system and whether that bias is going to impact you and your organization. And typically that bias is the bias you care about as an enterprise may differ, right? You want it to have, the standard foundations for it, to treat people equitably and not be racist, for example. But there might be specific biases, such as in the legal field, for example. You'd need it to, maintain certain standards, and you'd need to check that up front when you're assessing which model you're going to use. Some models, for example, wouldn't have a very strong understanding of facts. They might just hallucinate facts and make them up. Should be inappropriate for a legal context, for sure. And other models will be much more rigorous about, provenancing, where they're getting the information and sourcing and referencing and showing you how they came to a specific conclusion. That might be relevant for critical cases such as, the legal context. In other cases, like a creative field, you may want the model to hallucinate more, to maybe, explore options that are just outside of the bounds of our own imagination even, in order to create theater, in order to push the boundaries of creativity. It might not need to care about facts. You might actually not want it to. You might want it to create something like an image or a movie that's entirely unphysical, where the gravity doesn't exist, or aliens pop through from other dimensions. So it really depends on your evaluation criteria, and every enterprise should really be intentional about creating those evaluation criteria so that they match their core beliefs and their core operational needs as well.
So looking ahead, how can businesses use AI to remain competitive? They need to manage things like legal risk, and they also need to maintain ethical standards. So there's a balancing act, I think, because some of the issues and some of the risks are legal or regulatory, and some are sort of softer risks in terms of what your audience or your customers or your stakeholders expect from you. So how do businesses who are trying to adopt AI and integrate that into their business, how do they walk that tightrope?
I'd say like you're characterizing it already, it's a bit of a risk landscape. So as long as you've mapped that out in your organization with respect to what your expectations are, your customers' expectations are, your staff's expectations are, your suppliers, you can usually find, spaces in that risk matrix where the stars kind of align, where everyone is working in the same direction and they're comfortable with having AI do a task because it's going to do it very efficiently and in a safe, robust way in that specific corner of your risk matrix. There'll be others where it's more of a negotiation, more of a compromise, where maybe you need to put some additional safeguards in place before one of those kind of stakeholders is satisfied, say a customer or maybe a regulator or maybe you as a business or an insurer, for example. So in each of those scenarios, you'll have various different stakeholders who you need to help to de-risk, to bring them into the comfort zone of using AI in that specific context. When you can do that, and that's where a lot of the adoption is happening, that's great, and you'll get the efficiencies that come with that and the scale and the automation. Where you don't, or you don't yet, you need to have that very human conversation around, what are your risks? How do we reduce them? How can I reassure you? Maybe using those evaluations we talked about earlier, those model evaluations. How can I reassure you that it's going to work as you want it to work in those specific circumstances? And really bring people on that journey, because it's just like you would have done historically anyway before AI came along. You would have tried to reassure people that you're going to execute on their will and their intent as faithfully as you could. And you're trying to do that within the boundaries of their risk envelope. And you're doing the same again here. You bring them on that journey. You're showing them that the risk hasn't changed or it's reduced, and you can also maybe share the gains and kind of bring people on the journey that way in terms of incentivizing it, show them that it's more economical, more efficient. So yeah, I would say it's a part of it's a conversation one, but it's also one that you can back up with these evaluations, with the process that gives people this kind of evidence and safety they need to make those kinds of decisions about where you start to roll it out and really scale.
Yeah, and I think what's come across in the whole of this episode is the need to really carefully map out and think through from the outset what you're trying to achieve and what those risks are and how you can de-risk things as much as possible. And nothing is risk-free, whether that's with technology or humans, but it's about understanding how to prioritise those risks, which are the most important risks for your business, and how do you mitigate those risks. So it's clear that AI is, if it's not already, it's going to become an integral part of the way we live our lives and an integral part of businesses. What emerging trends or technologies do you think will be redefining cyber risk and risk management over the next, say, 5 years? What are we looking to in the future?
So the part of that kind of spectrum of that question we focus on with my startup Egregious, it's really the human element, the behavioral element. So cyber risk used to be all about hardware and machines and kind of infrastructure in the beginning. And then it became more about code, the code that sits on the machines and orchestrates them and runs them. And so if you wanted to patch your system and make sure it was secure, you had to make sure the hardware was secure, but also the software was secure. Then we started to connect all the machines together, and the internet was born, and then the risk was kind of embedded in the network itself, and you had to make sure your network was secure. And so cyber had to go through this process of adding more and more of these layers that we chatted about. First the hardware layer, then the software layer, then the network layer. And so its remit has just been this ever-expanding collective of interconnected bits and bobs, and basically all of the newest innovations and inventions that humans can come up with. And the latest invention is AI, and we are connecting that into our systems too. So really where cyber is going is basically expanding its remit to include the latest human invention, which is now pervasive and is connected to everything we use every day and everything society relies on. So where we see it going is really just cyber needs to bring that bit into the fold now as well. It needs to assess it as its own kind of risk surface and learn to manage it and to kind of operate in a way that people can feel safe and that those systems are robust and secure and will endure. And the bit of that that's quite new and novel is that AI behaves. It doesn't just do it. It kind of does something that's very much like a human. And we're not really used to that as humans. When we look out into the world, the only things that have behaved historically have been us humans and, our pets and animals, right? They're the things with behavior. But now there are things with behavior deeply entangled in our infrastructure and our day-to-day life that are non-human. They look and feel like human, but they're not. They're just code. They're just this new kind of appendage to the cyber landscape. So that's kind of something where I think we need to put a lot of intentional thought and work and focus, and also not to be fooled into thinking those things are human, because they imitate humans, but they're not humans. They're just code, and so they come with all of the the latent risks of code. So that's, for me, that's the most exciting bit of cyber. This kind of new bit where you have not just kind of the static machinery or the code, but you have these kind of living, acting, behaving things which are now scurrying around the infrastructure, almost like humans, but not really. And they're creating, very new and novel effects that we're only just discovering now.
And is that, I think, maybe just as a sort of final question, is that something that requires a cultural shift or learning from the public about actually how does this really work, and what can you trust? I suppose that's the question at the end of all of this. Who can you trust, and are you relying on human behaviours? Are you relying on technology that's imitating human behaviours? And that's feels like quite a big question to answer.
Yeah, one for another episode maybe. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Rupert, for sharing your insights with us. It's been really fascinating to talk to you today. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Charlotte.
And thank you for joining us on another episode of the Thinking Business podcast. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website and see the latest edition of Thinking Business.